this segment of Weather Legends, it's a continuation of weather myths and modification, where we'll talk about volcanoes and their likely effects on global weather patterns. I find that volcanic eruptions, have had a tremendous impact on patterns over the last several decades. And I guess I go back to Mount Pinatubo, Mount St. Helens. Did those really radically modify the weather patterns during those periods?
They did. And in fact, it was not immediate. Pinatubo erupted in June of 1991, and everybody was predicting or forecasting, it's going to make for a cooler summer and a much colder winter. Well, it did, but it didn't happen that quickly. The spread of the ash and dust from Pinatubo into the stratosphere at about 20 miles high took its time, but eventually, or ultimately, we did see changes. We did see a cooler than normal summer, not in the summer of 91, but in the summer of 92. And it also turned into a rather interesting and very active winter, purportedly due to the aerosol cloud put up by Pinatubo during the winter of 92, 93. In fact, you may remember that we had a tremendous nor'easter in December of 1992, and we also had a massive storm which occurred in March of 93, the so-called superstorm, the storm of the century, which some believe may have had a connection to the ash and dust cloud that was pumped into the atmosphere by Pinatubo almost 2 years prior. The granddaddy of all major volcanic eruptions occurred in 1815, a volcanic eruption that produced such a tremendous cloud. Tambora was the name of the volcano. Tambora produced such a tremendous cloud of ash and dust that a year later, after the eruption, all across the northern hemisphere, temperatures were below normal. And in fact, in New England, they actually said that it snowed every month of the year, including during the summer months, June, July, August, September. Temperatures were far below normal because of that cloud. Now, somebody out there is probably saying, well, what do you mean by the cloud? Why would the temperatures drop? It drops because the aerosol cloud, the cloud of ash and dust, encircles the northern hemisphere with time, and there's enough of that material around that can cause the sunlight, the heat and light from the sun, to be reflected back out into space. It acts like a shade, if you will, over the northern hemisphere, and helps to lower temperatures with time, with the occurrence of that cloud. I had an interview about 12 years ago with a gentleman at NASA, a climatologist by the name of Gavin Schmidt. And I had asked Dr. Schmidt if sunspots had anything to do with the so-called Little Ice Age that occurred in the 16 and 1700s. During that same time, there were very low sunspot numbers. There was hardly any sunspots. And the theory was the fewer the sunspots and the less of solar activity, the colder the atmosphere would get. Global cooling, if you will. And I asked him, if we have no sunspots, or if there's a lack of any solar activity, will that lead to another cool down of the atmosphere? And he cut me off at the pass. He said, absolutely not. He is British, by the way. And in his cultured British accent, he said, absolutely not. Well, I said, well, what caused the Little Ice Age if it wasn't for sunspots? And he pointed toward volcanism. He said there was a lot of volcanic activity occurring during that time in the late 17th and 18th century. And that, he said, is the cause of the lowering of the temperatures over the northern hemisphere, not having anything to do with sunspots. A very contentious issue. There are some people who today believe that sunspots still manage to have a connection with the weather and the climate and cool things down or warm things up. But a better, I think, example or a better explanation would be volcanoes, because, again, you get a good volcano to blow its top and put a lot of material up into the atmosphere over time. Within about a year or two after the eruption, there have been cases where we have noted lower temperatures, more stormier conditions, and they're even talking about that underground volcano that erupted a few years ago, the Tonga volcano. This is not your standard volcano, which is above ground. This was underwater. And apparently it blew a tremendous amount of interacting with the oceans, the Pacific Ocean, South Pacific Ocean, a tremendous amount of water vapor into the atmosphere, hundreds and thousands and millions of gallons of water vapor injected into the atmosphere. And some say that the crazy weather that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years has a connection to that volcanic eruption.
When Mount St. Helens erupted, if you recall, the plume reached the Northeast in 5 days. And I remember that summer, very rainy and very cool for the Northeast. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I do know we were doing a lot of things outdoors, scheduling a lot of events outdoors, and it was a huge problem once that plume came across the Northeast.
So it appears that volcanic eruptions have had a much more significant impact on global weather patterns throughout the centuries, and likely more than what human technology might ever be able to achieve when it comes to weather modification. But even with our modern technology, research, and everything we know now, is it realistically possible for humans to someday control the weather, and perhaps on a global scale?
In science, I mean, if we were doctors, you put things on a table, you operate, and you cure. You can't do that with the atmosphere. There's too many parameters. They're forever changing. It is too vast. It will be a long, long time before that ever happens.
It's a fascinating book. I remember, again, reading it. I got it somewhere in my archives 30, 40 years ago. So if you want to get a hold of it, I think you'll find it most interesting. The name again of the book is Blizzard by George Stone. And it's, again, a novel, a science fiction novel, in a way about weather modification, about producing a big snowstorm. I think I remember correctly toward the end of the book, there was an 85-foot snowdrift on top of the White House that collapsed the White House. If you can find it, I think it could make for very entertaining reading. And like I said, I don't understand why they never made a movie out of it, because it sounds like the kind of movie that would certainly, especially with today's special effects, would go a long way today.
I don't think any of us will be around to actually see weather modification work. Totally.
But I would not rule out anything. Future can be a long time. There may be ways of putting something up that will help reduce the heat coming in from the sun, if indeed we continue to warm up. But right now nature has the big hand, the big stick. All we can do is try to cope with it as best we can.